there's a scene in the book where I learned about what golden showers and orgies were. I was 11. My youth pastor preached about it. And so I was like, what's that? On the way through town, we passed him and he'd gone to his office to get his gun. So I know that we would not be here if I'd stayed. I didn't so much fall in love. I felt like I was falling into God's plan for my life.
Whoa. Say that again. That was incredible. Say that again.
If God's going to break because you asked a question, then that's not God.
Welcome everyone to Deep Drinks Podcast. Today my guest is TiaLevings, author of A Well-Trained Wife, My Escape from Christian Patriarchy. Tia's story is a raw and powerful account of breaking free from a suffocating grip of Christian patriarchy. Her journey exposes the deep impact of fundamentalist control on women's lives and stands as a bold call for freedom and equality. Welcome to Deep Drinks Podcast, TiaLevings.
Thank you so much for having me.
What are we drinking today?
Oh, we are drinking, I am drinking, this is a bourbon with a round ice cube in it. So it will become bourbon and water pretty quickly here.
Now, for people who have been watching every episode of Deep Drinks, they know that I'm going through a bit of a mental health journey at the moment. I'm feeling really good today. I usually pump the brakes on the alcohol at the moment, so I brought myself a coffee, and then I was like, no, I'm going to get a hot chocolate as well. And then when I heard you drinking bourbon, I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to have a Lagavulin 16.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So I got water, hot chocolate, coffee, Lagavulin 16. It's going to be
That's
great.
so good. My partner collects bourbons, and that's a gorgeous bottle. I don't know what it is, but he would.
So good. It's a good Scotch. It's a very smoky Scotch. It's it's funny. I've said this numerous times, but I have lots of people on, and it's really funny. A lot of the atheist content creators that I bring on, they won't drink, or they don't drink publicly, or they don't drink. But then I'll bring on Bible scholars and Christian apologists, and they're like, hard liquor. I'm like, whoa.
That's actually important. That's actually a point. Yeah, that's actually a thing. I mean, you know that from reading my book, that the alcohol journey is part of it. So yeah, that's actually a tell. I'm not surprised.
But it's been so long since I first reached out to you, and I don't actually remember why I reached out to you. I remember seeing clips of you. I don't remember the exact clip, but I remember seeing something, and I was like, I need to get Tia on Deep Drinks. So I reached out to you, and it's been months, and then you've released your book since then, and I've had a chance to read it. It is heartbreaking, phenomenal. You got a really good way with words. So if you could give us a bit of an overview about what it was like for you growing up as a child, like how were you introduced to this world, and like how did you start life?
I always start this story by saying it's very important to know that I spent my first 10 years in one environment, my second 10 years of my childhood in a different environment. And the reason why that's important is because I had a self-development to go back to and to call back on that someone who was born into high control patriarchy may not have had, because high control patriarchy does not allow for childhood development. It shuts down ordinary milestones and goals and challenges, and it forces conformity and indoctrination. So somebody who grew up in it is going to have a different experience than someone like me who had a core self that developed in my young early years that I was able to pull from later in life when I needed to, like, who is Tia? I had some idea of who Tia is. So that is where my story started. My parents, we grew up in a rural area, country area where my parents were just hardworking people with religion in their lives. It was not dominant. We went to church on Christmas and Easter and a few times a year. My mom liked to sing in the choir, but it wasn't like we went every Sunday even. And we were there until I was 10. And then the economy in our state plummeted and crashed, and my dad needed work. So we moved to the South, to Jacksonville, Florida, to a big city. I had never seen a city before. I had never seen Black people before. I'd never seen crowds, asphalt. It was complete and total culture shock. And I had no reference. Of course, this was 1984. So there's no, like I say, psychological awareness about what a child might be feeling with that kind of culture shock. It wasn't there. And so there was no discussion. I just went to school the next day in this my fourth grade class year was as big as my entire town, so it was like very, very different. And not long after that, they joined the big church, this big mega church downtown, in order to help us have friends and find a social life and be involved and be Christians. And my parents, sometimes people push back and say I'm not hard enough on them in the book, but my parents weren't the source of a lot of my oppression. They were doing what a lot of parents want, which is they want to give their kids a safe upbringing, um, in a beautiful place that with people who say they have it all figured out. They wanted
Mhm.
us to have good friends and be safe, and so they took us to church, which is a very ordinary experience in multiple cultures. You take your child where everyone else is. We had 20,000 members at that church. It was a very large church. And the pastor was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the head of the biggest evangelical movement in America. And so we had no reason to think that we were in any kind of high control environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Can I
it
just
didn't, they, they don't lead with the outcome. They tell you what they're promising,
of
they're
course, and
promising
usually
health,
it's
wealth. Yeah.
usually if you stay in that like outer circle of the church, like you rock up every week, but you're not getting involved in leadership and stuff like that. You
Mhm.
generally it's probably a pretty positive experience overall. Like it's probably
Right.
not there's not too much damaging going on in relative terms. But you said something about like not being hard on your parents. I feel exactly the same. Like my parents obviously have made mistakes, but they've done the best that they absolutely could. And it broke my
Mhm.
heart one time when my mum, said she's sorry that she brought us to church. She was just doing what she thought was good. And I
Mhm.
was like, Mum, I was like, don't ever, Atlas, our child Atlas, he's going to grow up and we hopefully he has less trauma, but like, hopefully
Mhm.
he's talking to his kids like, I'm not going to screw up, screw you guys up like
Right.
my parents screwed me up. Like, I hope each generation gets better, but like, you're just trying to do the best you
Right.
could. It's like,
You
I
can.
totally get
Yeah.
that. I totally
And
get
these
that.
church movements went after parents. Like, that's important to
Mm,
note. This was a system they were up against. The evangelical movement was drilling down on families through James Dobson's Focus on the Family, and it was really heavy hitting marketing. And my parents were young 20 somethings who'd just been through significant trauma of their own. They had two little girls and they wanted to do the right thing. And I can't fault them for that. I've been a mom.
mm,
I raised my kids to adulthood. I know how many hard calls you face. And that they're just not the source of my trauma. I know there's readers that are like, I want you to be harder on your parents. And I'm like, well, what they did was just so natural. It was so normal. And
mm.
if someone had said, well, we don't have any success stories from this church, or we have a really high abuse rate, or you don't know this yet, but we're becoming more fundamentalist and you might want to watch out. There was nothing like that for them to make an informed decision, So I
Yeah.
cut them some slack in their young 20s with two little girls and having just lost everything they owned.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's something I get confused about as an Australian. Maybe you can help me. I understand what evangelical is. I think I was an evangelical.
Hmm.
I was part
Probably.
of a church. I was part of a church. We would, have praise, worship. There was sometimes speaking in tongues, but it was
Hmm.
usually done on like a prayer night or something, not in the main service. There was laying on of hands. There was believing for healing. There was a little bit of prosperity preaching, but not really. Nothing like Kenneth Copeland or people like that, or TD Jakes or something. Where, like, what type of church were you kind of part of? Is it like, where does it fall in the line of those things? Was it more in the realm of like uh, Kenneth Copeland or was it more in the line of like, I don't know, I don't even know, I didn't even have an example, but where did you guys believe in tongues?
Hmm.
Did you guys pray for
Hmm.
healings? Did you guys
Hmm.
do women cover their head when they were praying in the church? Like what was it like?
Yeah, none of that. You're describing more of the Pentecostal movement here,
Yeah.
which is a kind of evangelicism. So let me back up. Evangelicism in America, and I think worldwide, is based on the Great Commission of Jesus, which says, "Go ye into all the world and make disciples of men." And it is the idea that you're going to spread this message of Christianity person to person. You're going to
Mm.
evangelize. Um, so there are denominations within the evangelical movement, and it sounds like you were in one that's probably a little more charismatic than we were.
Hmm.
The Pentecostals are also more charismatic than the Southern Baptists. This is old time religion, Southern American
Okay.
South. So it's like old hymns, um, not as staunch and uptight as the Presbyterians were, but not as charismatic as the non-denominational and Pentecostals. We sang hymns, we had sermons, lots of hellfire and brimstone kind of scare tactic preaching.
Mhm.
Um, but also a wealthy church really hell-bent on production. So we had like huge children's musicals, big choir, big orchestra, TV lights, ministries for every level of every member of the family. Uh, just we went on choir tours and ski trips, and it was a whole culture. It was like a world within a world.
Is
Be
that
ye
church
in the world and
still
not of
Yeah,
it.
exactly. Is that church still going strong?
Sort of, kind of. When I was a kid, we had 11 city blocks in the downtown heart of Jacksonville.
Mhm.
And it was that way for good 80 years, I think. Now, because of all kinds of scandal accountability and pastoral passing the baton and changes in the movement itself, it's down to one city block. So it is still
Huh.
thriving. It is still a big presence, but it's nothing like it was, which really begs the question, what was it all for?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's interesting how, like, scandal in church? No, like, that there's, did you ever hear about Peter Popoff?
Oh, it's very familiar, but I hear a lot
Yeah.
about these. You have to fill me in.
Oh, yeah, it's just I can't believe that, like, so he gets caught absolutely cheating. Did you say fill me in or don't fill me in?
Oh, fill me in. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's familiar. I
He's
just don't remember the details.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
he gets caught, like, actually, James Randi brought in a radio scanner because he seemed to have, like, prophetic words for people like, "Bethy at 189, Mary Street, you're gonna be healed of cancer." And, like, he would say stuff like that, and, he was getting the information from prayer cards that they would write out before the service, and then his wife would be
Mm,
on, like, a radioing him into his earpiece, and James Randi exposed him, and he was like, like, showed it on national TV with the audio and everything, bags and bags of money that they're just throwing in the back of their car, like, just absolutely 100%, like, definitely a fraud, rorting people. He's still going
mhm.
today. Like, he lost a lot. Like, I think
Wow.
he stepped down for a little while, but he's still got a church today. Like, people still like, well, he's the man of God and he preaches and he's made some mistakes, but
That's the
that's
thing.
okay. And he's still doing the same thing. I
That's
just
the
can't
thing.
believe.
They're so heavily indoctrinated to accept that God's anointed can do no wrong, or God's anointed
Mm,
must be forgiven. I mean, this is why we're in the state we're in America right now, because they equate Trump as God's anointed. And so he
yeah.
can get away with anything he wants and they'll forgive him because that's what they're
Mm.
preconditioned to do.
Yeah, that's it's I love when I see it's a bit of a crass joke that I say, but I love when I see like a family friend or a friend on Facebook, like an old, usually someone older conservative will post something like in pro Trump, like he's not a perfect man, but he's the man of God or whatever. I'll say something really crass like he sure does have the evangelicals right by the pussy, and it's
He
like
does.
it's such a
Grabbed.
gross. I hate saying that because it's so, like, it's
Hmm.
gross, but it's like, it works because it's using something that he said
Right.
about women, and it's like,
Right.
so it's, yeah, it's just,
I
I
love
just
that. I
can't
might
believe it.
steal it. It's so
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
It's
Okay,
so
so
good.
you're in this church,
Hmm.
you're growing up. Like, do you remember? Like, I remember you talking a little bit in your book about learning about hell for the first time. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that?
So the one of the ways that they really get your attention is they scare you constantly. So it was a lot of fear-based teachings, no matter what it was, whether it was our eternal security, or our day-to-day, how we
Mm,
live, where we go, who we talk to, how we spend our time. So lots of screaming, lots of vivid descriptions of a literal lake of fire, lots of long altar calls until somebody, usually we had these huge altar calls, every invitational season had like, 20, 30 people every night coming down and rededicating their lives, or praying the prayer of salvation. So yeah, it was like a lot of scare you straight, scare you to Jesus, scare you to their agenda. Now, it's important to, I always point out that the evangelical church movement and the Southern Baptist Convention, especially, was politicizing over those same spans of years. And it was also becoming more fundamentalist over those
Mm.
span of years. So while when I was a very young child and we first came there, it was just a large version of a cozy congregation where lots of intergenerational families had been there for a long time. And it was, they're part of their tradition, their family tradition. By the time I'm 20 years old, it's become pretty rigid, pretty political, um, dominant in our city politics, that's for sure. And so it was a very different experience in that
Mm.
amount of time. So a lot of change was happening, and it was all fear based. It was all the bad liberals are going to get you, and the bad gays, and the bad um,
Oh, the gays.
women. There was a show called Murphy Brown in the 90s, and she was going to have a baby on her own without a husband on TV, and they lost their minds over that. Like,
Mm.
you can't have
Yeah.
single parenting. You can't.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's single parents in the congregation hearing that something's really wrong with them because they're not coupled in.
I have a friend. I've talked about him. I talk about him like every episode at the moment. But first ever guest on Deep Drinks, met him in ministry college. He's gay for 45 years or whatever. He goes over to the
Hmm.
States to with some of his friends. She's on her fourth marriage, and she's describing to him in detail about how same-sex marriage is ruining the sanctity of marriage. And I'm like, you're on
Well,
your fourth marriage, like,
it's the
So
pot calling the kettle black. It's that hypocrisy there.
yeah.
And also it becomes more hardline. So, like, when they're talking about homosexuality, when I was growing up, that was during the AIDS crisis,
Mm.
and they were speaking so hatefully to gay people and about gay people, and about what would happen to us if we dared suggest we were gay. And instead of showing all of those AIDS patients compassion, I mean, Princess Diana would be in People magazine, and she would be tending to them. And that's what we're supposed to do, as Christians. We're supposed to tend to the sick and the poor and be kind and have compassion. And instead, they're vilified and called names, and um, the derogatory words that I shouldn't say. And I'm censoring myself, but they did not, they
Yeah,
did,
yeah,
they said them in the
yeah.
pulpit, and I'm a young child hearing that. And they used to tell us, you can't go watch R-rated movies, but we were in R-rated sermons 3 days a week,
Oh,
3 times a week.
that is so true.
Yeah. I learned all
Ah,
my bad sexy stuff from church. Like, I learned about STDs, and I learned about there's a scene in the book where I learned about what golden showers um and goner and what's the word, the other one, golden showers and orgies were. I was 11, and my
yeah,
my youth pastor preached about it, and so I was like, what's that? Because I was a
yeah,
kid. I shouldn't have
yeah.
known that. I shouldn't have known that, but he had no
It is
discretion.
it is so strange. Hey, and did you ever get people who were like, "Well, if we let the gays marry, soon we'll be having sex with animals," and it's like that slippery
Yes.
slope argument.
Yes.
Oh, it's
Of
so bizarre,
course.
right?
'Cause
It's like
yeah,
this weird alternative reality. Like, what? We're all going to move to France? It's like, what? How's that
yeah.
have got to do with anything? Like that. This is
It
it's so bizarre.
it really
Uh,
gets twisted, because now I believe that when they say those kinds of things, they are telling on themselves and they're projecting. And so then I'm like, "You're telling me you wanna have sex with animals? I don't need to know that. That's I don't
yeah,
I don't."
yeah. Or like it's actually really interesting when someone like I talk to a lot of people who've gone through or experienced gay conversion therapy, and it's like,
Mhm.
do the people running this, do they think that you can choose your sexual expression? Because if that's a tell, like if you think
Yeah,
that you
they
can
do
like
because they did. That's why.
yeah,
They
yeah,
think that because they did it.
or
Yeah.
like maybe like someone is a little bit more like they're bisexual or a little bit more attracted to someone of the same sex or something, like more than like the average person. They're feeling really conflicted about this, so then they zero in on this problem and get involved. Um,
Yeah.
so you're when you're growing up too, you would already maybe I don't know how old you were, but you first cheated on your future husband. You mentioned it in your book. Tell us about that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, so having crushes, or my friend actually used that line with me, but we heard it all the time, that when you have a crush on someone, when you like them, when you date them, when you give your heart to them in any kind of capacity, you are cheating on your future spouse. and
Mm.
you're sinning. And what's really sad about that is that dating and social interaction as a teenager helps prepare you for what a healthy marriage will be later. It helps you understand, who you should be with and who you should not be. And if they had not taught us that, I might have had an ounce of courage to say no when I was being abused as a fiance, and call it
Mm.
off. But I didn't have any of that. It was shut it all down, trust it'll be okay, because you are cheating. You're somehow cheating on someone who doesn't even exist yet. Um,
Mm.
yeah, by doing something that is actually pretty healthy. Pretty
Yeah,
healthy
and
to date.
do exactly. And so you got together. So was it Alan that you got
Yes.
together with? Yeah. Can you
Yeah.
tell us how did you first meet Alan? And because kind of Alan's kind of the crux of the story
Yeah.
for a good chunk of the middle. So let's jump into Alan. Who is Alan, and um, how did that all happen?
Alan was my first husband, and I met him when I was just past 18, just turned 19 barely. Um, we met at a hayride in December, and we were engaged a month later, and we were married within the year. He was very charming, a few years older than me, adorable, kind at first, very dashing. He was a sailor, came through the Navy to Jacksonville through the Navy. Um, I did not have any experience with boys really. My best friend growing up was gay, and I was trying to navigate how I could be friends with. We have no co-ed friendship. Once you're an adult, you're expected to get married and then not to be friends with the opposite sex anymore. And so I knew that my friendship was on a ticking timeline.
Hmm.
Um, but I didn't have any experience like dating. I'd had a couple dates, before I met Alan. But he swept me off my feet in a way that's not typical. I want to say, when we say he swept me off my feet, it sounds like you fall in love. I didn't so much fall in love. I felt like I was falling into God's plan for my life, that was finally meeting the person who um, was going to be God's best for my life, because he said he was God's best for my life, which is a phrase we used.
Mm.
Um, and I felt like this was how my life was going to go. And by complying with it, I was being obedient. And I didn't not like him. So I thought, I thought, okay, we'll get married, and everything around me supported that. Elizabeth Elliot's Passion and Purity, and all the training that we had around purity culture, modesty culture, dating. The burgeoning courtship movement was coming for us with Josh Harris, and I Kiss Dating Goodbye was just a little bit after me, but it was definitely that was the talk in fundamentalist circles, which was definitely happening in my church. So I didn't think really twice externally that I didn't love him or didn't know what falling in love felt like. But internally, I was kind of confused. I kind of wanted to just to slow down so I could think for a second. I just wanted
Mm.
to be like, hold on a second. I see the potential of him, but I don't really know if I know him.
Mm.
But there was no time for that. It was get secured quickly, because you might have sex before you're married, and you don't want to have that. So
Yeah,
that was the
that would
worst.
be
Yeah.
that would be the worst case scenario. And sorry if you can hear my
I
lovely
can hear
child
your baby,
screaming.
and it makes me
Yeah.
happy.
um, yeah, he's a joy. So, you're actually engaged the first time you kind of experienced some domestic abuse, right? And like how
Yeah,
you see, this is the thing is like if you were part of quote unquote the world, this
right.
would be a red flag. This would be a huge red
Yeah,
flag. This would be like,
yes.
do you think you would
Breakup
have
material.
if you didn't have if you didn't have the promise of this is God's anointed or this is God's plan, do you think
Mhm.
that would have like kind of stopped you in your tracks during the engagement?
Yes. If I'd known that there was something called domestic abuse, if I'd known that love wasn't supposed to hurt, that you shouldn't keep secrets like this. If anybody had told me anything about that and prepared me to know what the difference is between um, abuse and right treatment, um, it would have helped. I would have maybe told my friends, and then my friends would have coaxed me to break up with him, and that's how that would have happened. As it was, I internalized everything immediately, assumed it was my fault, and that I could also fix it if I just loved him and loved Jesus hard enough. So that's what they conditioned me for, was that any problem can be solved, and that if someone's that mad at you, it must be your fault. You did something wrong. You sinned. So that's the position I took right away.
To give everyone some context about like your relationship with Alan,
Mhm.
could you give us an overview of like some of the weirder things, or some of the, looking back now, you're like, that was really weird that he made me call him Lord, or
Yeah.
can you just give an overview of like what your marriage was like with Alan?
Yeah. So Alan was somebody who grew up with a lot of childhood trauma. He didn't, of course, there was no language for that in the 90s. He'd had repeat experiences with fiancés and failed engagements before me, and he's had many marriages after me. He's a disorganized, chaotic person with personality disorders that we did not know about, of course, until after the divorce. And he loved theology and he loved God and he very much wanted to do the right thing. So he was always trying to make his life better, manage his inner chaos, manage external chaos, do the right thing. But he had no capacity for any of that. And he needed mental health support, but we were not allowed to use shrinks or doctors or medications or anything like that. So he was just out there doing it on his own, praying really hard and studying really hard and failing multiple times because he had no tolerance for any kind of um, situation where he felt out of control or he felt judged or that he might have to feel uncomfortable and defer to someone else's rights or um, identity. He couldn't handle any of that. So I'm careful assigning him too much villainous
Mm,
premeditation, because while he is a highly intelligent person and has some of that, it's not what he led with when I first met him. I met him at a time when he was truly trying to do the right thing. And if the system had supported him, he'd be a very different person. We'd have had a very different experience of each other. My children would have not had the grief to carry that they've had. So I think ultimate responsibility sits with the system. Um, he is responsible for his choices, but they were coerced. Um, and he's a tragic person in my experience. I think he deserved better. I think we deserved better. And because I know, this is something I know that I know, that he was ardently searching, he would have taken true assistance to heart if it had been offered. It was never
mm,
offered. Um, and I don't think you can say that of a lot of abuse dynamics where there's extreme narcissism involved. Later, he has developed narcissistic personality disorder, so he's a different person today than he was as a young man. But I try to hold young him in my memory the most because it's a kinder view of my children's father.
mm. Do you think that a lot of the, I guess, domestic abuse and kind of weird changes in uh, well, I guess like kind of episodes were to do more with mental health, or more to do with a combination of mental health and the theology that you guys were brought up in, or like what do you think
Hmm.
was the driving force behind a lot of it?
That is a great question. And as I work with survivors, I'm kind of convinced that mental illness thrives in fundamentalism, and it is nurtured. It is actually a toxicity that's nurtured in that dynamic. Men are especially not allowed the same resources that would help them be healthier people, and instead their vices are fed. So their hyper control or their toxic masculinity or their unemotive, expression prisons that they have to stay in. I think that it's different at different times in the story. So I think he led with disorganization and chaos as a young man. I think that our theology, especially during the reformed years, really sickened that situation. And then by the end, we had addiction in the mix too. So
Mm.
um, I think it just depends. I mean, it was almost 20 years span we're talking here. So that's
Yeah,
different things at different times.
yeah, 100%. So so how, I guess, so you're in this toxic and of course your book is like filled with like
Mhm.
lots of stuff that we're just kind of skipping over. um
Yeah, people
and
can read. It's fine.
people go read the book, yeah, and I really recommend the audiobook. You do such a good
Mm,
good
thank you.
voiceover for that. It's really good too, because you're the one who reads it, and it's just fantastic. uh
Thank you.
how did you first start seeing cracks in your theology and start like looking for a way out of this like toxic living situation?
Mm. Oh, so many layers. Yeah, this is so interesting because I'm answering it as a deconstructed person who knows I'm a little more honest today. I'm a lot more honest today about the cracks that I felt all along that I
Mhm.
didn't cop to when I was a young woman. But I think the one that I talk about most in the book and also in interviews is that I really tried. Our first 3 years were so traumatic and so boxing. I was so contained and so depressed for our first 3 years. And then our daughter was born with a heart defect. And that is a real marker in our story because she she had to take us out of that fundamentalist world. We had to go into the medical world where we had to go into the medical world where women I was around different kinds of women. I was in a different world. I was removed from my high control environment. All of that contributed to cracks in the belief system.
Mhm.
And then at the end of that experience, she died, and my belief system shattered. Everything about me broke, and I had to put myself back together in a way that wasn't the same as it had been before. So I'm
Mm.
not the same person after Clara that I was before Clara. And even though I tried for another 7 years to try to do the best I can in that world, it's not the same. And one of the reasons why it's not the same is because the mind control spell has been broken.
Mm.
I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical because I know there's other ways.
You mentioned, there was one, like, really bad, night,
Yeah, the night I escaped is supernatural, and I struggle to call it that, and at the same time, I don't have a lot of other explanations for it. Um, we I knew at that point that I was leaving. I had been working with a priest. We'd converted to Eastern Orthodoxy at this point, and I was working with a priest who was going to help me get out because things had escalated so badly. We were in so much danger, and I finally understood and knew that we were in so much danger. And so I'd made plans to leave during the day, and it just didn't get a chance to do that because the violence escalated before I had a chance to enact those plans. And it was Halloween, 2007. My kids were gonna trick or treat for the first time. We weren't really allowed to do Halloween any other time, before that. So, um, we lived in this little tiny town, and I was gonna let them trick or treat. And so we went trick or treating, and I knew something was wrong that night. I knew he was off, and because of what else had been happening over the last few weeks and months, it was a very dark year. And after they went to bed, after I got everybody asleep, he had sort of I guess, a psychotic break. He kind of just gave into whatever battle he was fighting. He gave into. He held me hostage for 4 hours and then left in the middle of it, like at the end of that 4 hour time, but in the middle of the night, it was like 12:30, 1 o'clock, and he'd never left before in what I considered a fight. He'd
mm,
never done that. So it was very unusual. Once he left, I heard a voice in my head say, run. And I grabbed my kids and the day's laundry and my laptop and got in the car. And on the way through town, we passed him and he'd gone to his office to get his gun. So I know that we would not be here if I'd stayed. Um, I don't know what that voice was. I don't know what prompted him. I don't know any of that. I just know that that's how it happened. And we went to my priest's house that night, and we left the next day.
mm. Yeah, it's, I had a similar kind of story, not similar story in that in exact same sense, but I there was a moment where my mum was, being threatened to be killed one night, and I had to, like, escape. I jumped out of a window and called, went to the
Mm,
neighbor's house at, like, 3 in the morning and called the police. So that part
mm.
really, like, brought up a lot of stuff for me. Like, that, brings up a lot of, like, I guess, trauma, and, it was very
Yes.
visceral, very real. Do you remember the days after that? Where was God for you in your
Wow,
psyche?
that's a great question. No one has ever asked me that question, so let me hold it for a second.
Yeah.
Um, It's very similar to what it felt like in the children's hospital when my daughter was in the hospital. Um, that's not a place where you think about God so much, because you're surviving. And that's what that time felt like. It felt like survival. I really rejected any inquiry to how was my prayer life, or platitudes about how Jesus provides, or whatever. I just didn't have any. I couldn't engage with it in any capacity, because I
Mm.
was just trying to put one foot in front of the other, a minute at a time. It was not like even a day at a time kind of a thing. It was really hard to recover from that and go through it, and be strong for my children and stay healthy enough to keep functioning. And if God was there, then God was there, but I wasn't aware of it. Just,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So, um, how does your so you obviously gone through a lot of trauma at this stage. How does your worldview kind of develop from there?
Hmm.
You're now like, obviously God wasn't the well, this wasn't the man of God for you, or maybe something went wrong along the lines. You're just surviving. Obviously, you're just
Yeah.
trying to be a mum for your kids. Your kids are probably wondering about the Halloween candy, and making sure you get that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in the book. Um, how does your belief system develop from that experience?
Again, another great question. So one of the things I felt once I started, well, first I slept a lot when I got to my parents' house, and I had to tell them everything they didn't know, and I had to start really being honest with people, which was hard, but ultimately so freeing. And that freedom caught me. It was there. It was there to help me breathe and give me a new space to be, over and over again. And so, little things, like I wasn't allowed to vote when I was in that marriage. And that year was an election year. It was the year Obama ran. And so I put a bumper sticker on my car for Obama. It was like I got to do things that I'd been holding in for so long. And I got to express and be Tia for the first time.
Mm,
And so while there were sections of that time that are so hard, especially from a traumatic standpoint, and getting on my feet for the first time, and recovery, there are other times that are just joy, because I'm finally able to be Tia and find out who Tia is, and what she likes and what she wants to do, and what does she see for the rest of her life. I was 33 years old, um, and I had so much ahead of me, and I knew it. I knew
mm,
that we had survived something unlikely, that we were not really supposed to survive that, and we were very fortunate, and that I could be the kind of parent that I wanted to be, and I had a new chance at life.
mhm. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so good. I love. I asked you before we started if you could read a section of your book,
Oh
because I just
yeah.
think you do way better justice than me.
Yeah. I'm gonna turn
It's
the
on page
big
two
light.
forty six.
There we
Such a
go.
nice book, by the way. I have to.
Oh, I love her.
So so good.
I love going thump 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 on her hardcover. I love this cover image. I mean, I'm so grateful that I was
Are
able
you the
to.
kind of person that loves books? Like,
I love
will
books. I love
yeah.
books. And I wrote this book with a whole library behind me. It's mostly in storage right now, but um, I felt like I had the voices of other writers at my back, encouraging me to go, go, go.
Yeah.
And then I'm joining this, to it. And I
Yeah.
really, everything, like the geek out process of what it takes to like publish with a big five publisher and have international reach and a hardcover, and I'm on the New York Times bestsellers list. All of that writer stuff is very redemptive, because
Yeah.
that's who I always wanted to be, was a writer.
Yeah.
So yeah. So to set this scene up, I'm in recovery. It's about the first 3-4 years out of recovery, and actually, I have just met the man who would become my second husband, and I'm falling in love, real love, for the first time, and discovering what that feels like in contrast to what I experienced the first time. I'd begun keeping account of the teachings that turned out to be wrong. I noted them in a little purple book I kept by the bed, finding hope in reality instead of dangling promises. I tucked my tiny diary of truth in the drawer the way I once did my little pink book with the padlock when I was 13, embarrassed and protective. I made lists, this time not about boys I liked, but about the lies and what they'd cost me. Purity culture hadn't prepared me for healthy sexuality. Keeping sweet hadn't equipped me to speak up about abuse. Waiting for touch to happen all at once hadn't allowed my nervous system to acclimate to intimacy. Doctors weren't evil agents of a new world order. Scaring me with hell hadn't led to loving Jesus. Cutting off gay friends didn't make them straight. What else was wrong? Every day I found new things, old beliefs to pick apart and sort through.
Mm, so good.
Yeah, deconstruction in a nutshell. That's how it started.
It's so that really is deconstruction in a nutshell. I have
Yeah.
done a lot of talked to a lot of people who have deconstructed, and when you start to really like realize like, whoa, what if like these things that I've believed for so long were lies, and what's
Mhm.
the damage that's done to my life
That's right.
and the lives of other people? It's
That's right.
really it's quite confrontational. It's quite hard to kind of go through.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Mm,
is devastating. It's where the grief really comes in. And I didn't at the time have access to the word grief. I didn't know that I needed to grieve what they had cost me, but I knew that that's what I felt. I felt so cheated. Um, I have years of life of experiences I should have had both, and then cheated with the experiences that I did have in its place. You know, a good example is my wedding night because they spent so much time promising me a beautiful wedding night if only I stayed a virgin. Instead, I was assaulted 3 times. So, I
mm,
mean, that's when you put together like a decade of preparation for the perfect God's best experience and then get handed the exact opposite and realize that that was a lie. And I
mm.
paid the price for that lie. They didn't pay the price for that lie. They're still promoting that lie to this day. Um, there's grief.
This question is and we can dive right a little bit deeper into this question, but do you think it's possible for someone to live like a biblical Christian? Well, I say biblical Christian. Do you think it's
Mm.
possible for someone to have, I guess, the world, the church worldview, the Christian worldview that you grew up with, and not in some way be abusive or patriarchal?
Oh, I want it to be possible. I really do. I know so many sincere people who do not intend to buy into oppressive patriarchy, and they really just love Jesus and they want to love their neighbor and they want to do the right thing.
Mm,
But they are not thinking for themselves. They're not willing to ask questions. They're not willing to listen to survivors because survivors talk about things that we don't like. It's unpleasant. And so they won't engage with the outcomes of what they're participating in. And it's that participation that really breaks the deal for me. If you're not willing to see how the church is harming people, then you're not safe.
mm,
And if you're participating in patriarchy, which so many Americans are, it's embodied. They don't even know how many ways they do it.
mm.
These little tiny subversive ways that they just don't even know. But they're not willing to ask because questions are so threatening. So do I think it's possible? I will say I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, that's a great answer. You know, like I was looking because your book really got me to think about. I hear this all the time from evangelical apologists that the Bible says that everyone is equal, that God created
Yeah.
everyone with equal. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. I'm like, it absolutely doesn't. Like, I think even in the Old Testament, there's a different price
Yeah.
between like a woman and a man if you're
Yeah.
selling them something, right? And I remember I looked up a few scriptures and I wanted to kind of look up these scriptures to kind of really dive into the problem of trying to massage this question in my head. Can you be like a devout Christian, follow the Bible? I mean, there's 45,000 denominations of Christianity, literally, but but let's say like a Christian that follows the Bible as in instructions. And I don't know, I haven't seen it yet either, because there's things like, I wrote a few down. 1 Corinthians 11:7-9. A man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but women is the glory of man. For man did not come from a woman, but woman from a man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. So women were created for men. Okay, like let's just call that poetic or something, or I don't know. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that really. 1 Corinthians 14:34-35. Women should remain silent in churches. This is New Testament, right? They're
That's
not allowed to
Paul.
speak. Yeah,
Yeah.
but must be submissive, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church. Okay, another one of Paul's, Ephesians 5:22-24. Wives, submit to yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. We massage that in Christian theology to be just like, submit doesn't mean submit as in like kowtowing or like being um, the lesser partner. But for you, it definitely was.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Alan asked you to call him my lord, and you had strange spanking rituals and
Right.
punishments if you did things wrong.
That's right.
And they're getting that from the Bible.
Right. It's the natural conclusion. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't
Yeah.
know, and there's a bunch of other scriptures I've written down as well, but you get the idea. They're there.
Yeah, I do. I do. I always had a problem with Paul growing up. I always thought that that was not in alignment with Jesus. Today, I take a more academic view of the way the Bible was curated,
Hmm.
Paul's own life and his own anti-Semitism and the role model that he was. And I remain angry that we don't have more female voices in the Bible. But um,
Yeah.
if we're supposed to be fruit inspectors and the proof is in the pudding, then I don't think a lot of that is for me anymore.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So it's so true. So this is a part of the conversation that I'm really interested in, that I wanted to ask you about, and it's about
Mhm.
you mentioned in the book your private spiritual life, and I asked you
Yeah.
if we could talk about
Yes,
your
you
private
can.
spiritual life before we started, because I find it interesting. Like, I've talked to a lot of people who deconstruct, and people, and deconstruct just means to kind of like pull your beliefs apart and like examine them and stuff. Doesn't
Right.
mean you hate Jesus and go to gay
No.
bars or something. You know what I mean? Like, it just means,
You might, but it's
yeah, you
not
might,
that's
yeah,
not
yeah,
the
exactly,
design. It's
exactly,
not got a
exactly,
goal in
exactly,
mind.
exactly. It's not like like a lot of Christians must think that we choose our favorite sin, and that's the sin we leave and then we go. I used to ask people, "What's your favorite sin?" That was the first question I used to ask. Obviously, because you're an atheist. So for me, I had a deeply personal relationship with Jesus, and um,
Mm.
I thought I did anyway. And I really believed
Yeah.
the Bible. I went through ministry college. I was a youth pastor,
Mm.
and
Mm.
I eventually learned that some of the things that was calling the voice of God in my head
Mhm.
wasn't like literally voices, but it was like intuition. Was
Right.
an OCD tick,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I found that out in therapy, and therapy was
Right.
like life changing for me. And it wasn't just like, I've told this story before, I won't tell it again, but there's lots of links I'll put. But I've told this story where it's not like the psychologist was like, that's just an OCD tick. Like, he demonstrated something to me in which I repeated a phrase out loud that I thought God had told me, and then my anxiety peaked, and he got me to keep saying it, and then it all went away, and I realized how silly that thought was, and it wasn't like, and I was like, why did I even think
Mm.
that? It was honestly like a magic spell was broken. So for me, I kind of discovered that my relationship with God may have been more me talking to myself or internal. I then
Mhm.
started looking at things like the Bible, how we got the Bible. I started looking at,
Mhm.
I was a young Earth creationist, so I believed in, the age of the Earth being 6,000 years old and Noah and the magical
Sure.
riverboat, and like, I believed in, I
Right.
believed in all this stuff, right?
Uh,
And so when I started learning about science and like, how is light from stars 13 billion light years away reaching Earth? That's a bit weird for a 6,000-year-old Earth and stuff like that. When I started to examine everything, I came to the
mm.
realization, like, two things. One, I still believe in Jesus in the same way that I still have I still have feelings towards Jesus or
Mhm.
God or that inner voice or something, right?
Mhm.
But I also don't believe that that's a good or reliable way to determine what's true or not. So it's
Mm.
like, I kind of separated my mind in a way that was like, for me, I was like, okay, I have these like feelings about God and faith and everything. They're still there, but I just
Yeah.
don't see them as valid reasons in determining whether or not something's true or not. So therefore, I have
Mm.
to just admit that I don't have good reasons, and if I don't have good reasons, I just have to say, well, I'm not convinced of the evidence.
Right.
So that's where I went. So I'm
Yeah.
really interested to see, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I'm really interested to see where you
Right.
went with your private spiritual life. Like, do you have, and maybe you don't even have an answer to this, but do you have a God in this private spiritual life? Is it like, what is it?
Yeah. So, the
Leave
reason why I
leave
love this
the
question,
world.
and yeah,
Yeah.
the reason why I love this question, and the reason why I wrote it in the book, as I identify as spiritually private. So the salvation prayer, when you grow up the way that I did, you pray the prayer when you're 4 or 5 years old, and a very young child, and that decision is supposed to bind you to a faith group for the rest of your life. It's the only situation where we expect a 5-year-old to make a life decision for the rest of their life. And what it denies is any kind of private exploration of what you really believe, which I believe is everyone's autonomous right. We should get to believe for ourselves and explore for ourselves and grow and evolve and come to our own conclusions and study and everything for ourselves. And that's denied Christian children because they're indoctrinated. So it's when I realized I needed to give younger me the autonomy and privacy that I prefer. I am a private person and about things that are deeply important to me. And and this is one of them. So I answer that question by saying I'm spiritually private, which always leads to a conversation. So I'm really grateful for that because it gives us an opportunity to like, hey, this was a violation. This you deserved as a young person to go through the process that you're having to deal with in adulthood now. This should have been part of your ordinary childhood development and it wasn't protected. It was taken from you. And I advocate for the protection of that. I think churches, unless they start dealing with how they handle indoctrination and abuse, they're not safe places for children. And and it's on parents, it's on today's young parents to realize, hey, we have a chance to do it differently here. Give your child the chance to explore and find out for themselves what they believe. um, do I have a God? I mean, I think that I'm a very spiritual person and that's evident in my character, and I always hope that people decide for themselves if I'm a trustworthy person or not, if I have good character, or if I'm somebody that they should take anything from a wisdom standpoint. I don't want a label to be the determinator there. And the label as a former people pleaser, as a always recovering people pleaser, I'm very aware I want to give you the answer that's going to make you happy so that you'll like me. And if I'm talking to a Christian, then that's a Christian. And if I'm talking to an atheist, then that's an atheist. And I need to guard against that people pleasing tendency in myself. So I don't answer it. I say, no, well, that's going to have some space around it. And I'm not going to tell you what box I fit in. It might be different tomorrow. I am allowed for spirituality to be fluid, and I'm allowed to explore and to change my mind when I'm confronted with new information. I will say that what you shared about your experience about becoming like going from young earth to science and like looking, it made my view of God much bigger. I definitely like I see intelligent design. I do believe that there is a divine presence around us. I have too many experiences in my life to deny that. Um, I think my personal walk and my deep what I thought was a love affair with Jesus turned out to be a lot of navel gazing and the sound of my own voice. Um, and my intuition, my inner wisdom saying there's something wrong here and you need to get out. Um, that has borne better fruit in my life. So I honor her. I honor that, and I like a divine presence that makes the world bigger, that makes people more loving, more accepting, better citizens of the planet. And that's what I lean towards. It's less dogmatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's funny because when I started learning about like evolution and things like that, and like how we're all kind of connected under that uh, the theory of evolution, I was like, it really made me. It filled me with a lot of awe and stuff. I didn't direct
Yes.
that towards like a god
Yes.
or anything, but like it made me like. I felt like whoa, or like when I'd see like photos from the Hubble telescope or something
Yes.
like that, I was like, this is so
Fractals. Do you know what
big. Yeah,
fractals? Yes.
got
Like
to
makes me think, oh my goodness, life is bigger than we've ever let
yeah,
it be.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's so much. Yeah, it's so it's what I found was that reality was greater or bigger than all gods. Do you know what I mean? Like I felt
Mm-mm.
like
Mm.
when I look at the to paraphrase Christopher Hitchens, when I look at the photos of the Hubble telescope, I can't go back to gawking at Moses and the burning bush. To me to me that's like lots that's considerably smaller. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes, I
But at
know
the same
exactly what you
time,
mean.
I'm amazed at I'm amazed at humanity and that humanity has come up with these stories or like have told these stories and the traditions that go with them and maybe why and thinking about why they told them and like what they were trying to do. Um, and I'm amazed at that and I feel awe with that as well. Um, have you ever read any non-Christian religious literature?
Yes, actually, that's part of my conversion story. When I right before I left, right before the escape, I hit this point where I just was like, God, if you're real, I'm going to need you to see me. I need to know that you value me as a human being, as a woman, as a Tia, as who I am, and not just an interchangeable vagina with hands that could serve my family. I knew I could be swapped out with a new model, and in the patriarchy, you don't have an identity. And so I needed, if I was going to believe in God, I needed to know that He believed in me too. And so I went to the library and I checked out a book on every other major world religion and kind of gave myself a crash course. And I just broadened my worldview in that experience. It's what ultimately led me to convert to Eastern Orthodoxy because at the moment, I needed a way to be Christian that was still acceptable to the Christians in my life. Um, but but it was amazing exposure to other presentations of the divine and other ways to believe in the universe and what is there and what's possible.
Yeah, there's a story. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this story. It's a Buddhist story from about Kisugutami. Have you heard about
Mhm.
this?
Mm-mm.
It might really work. It might have you might have done. I think I get the vibe you might have done something similar with Clara, who was the child that you
Okay.
guys lost. For those who I'm not sure if we mentioned her name, but so Kisukatami, the story goes like this: is the Buddha's just been enlightened. He's got some disciples. He's chilling somewhere doing his meditation or whatever. I'm going to paraphrase really poorly, but hope you get the idea. Kisukatami's child, I think, child of a couple of years, dies, and she's running from house to house in this village, panicking. Can anyone help my child? The child's died, and someone says, "Go see the Buddha. He's been enlightened. He might be able to help you." And she goes to see the Buddha. The Buddha says, "Yes, I'll be able to help you. Just go to one of the houses and bring me a cup of mustard seeds, and I'll be able to help you." It's always mustard seeds. It's funny in these like religious parables,
Right?
but yeah. So, and then as she's leaving, she's like, "Great, I'm going to get mustard seeds." And he says, "Oh, but it must come from a house where no one has died." And she's like, "Great, easy." So she goes
Okay.
to the first house and she asks for the mustard seeds. They give her the mustard seeds, and then they say, "Oh, actually, someone has died. It must come from somewhere where a house when someone hasn't died has never died." And she goes, "Oh, my auntie died last month here. Sorry, these mustard seeds might be good. That's okay. I'll go to the next house." And she goes to the next house and the next house and the next house, and every house someone had someone die. And then she
Mm.
realized that the Buddha must have been trying to teach her a lesson. So she went to the graveyard and buried her child, and then came back to the Buddha, and the Buddha said, "Have you brought the mustard seeds so I can help you?" And then she said, "Enough of these mustard seeds. Let me be your disciple." And the story behind that was the acceptance of death, and the acceptance of
Yeah.
the human condition, and being able to, and the acceptance of that actually being healing. It's not the
Right.
it's not
Right.
the it's not seeking after the child being healed. It's not accepting that like any, I guess, this is the will of God or anything like that. It's just accepting that this is part of life. And
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it helped Kisukatami move through the grief. I don't know if the story is historical or not, but it's definitely a story that helped me when I was dealing with grief. And when I read your book, I felt like, I don't know if it's exactly how you dealt with the grief, but it seemed like that story uh, may resonate with you, and I just wanted to tell you about it. What do you think about that?
First of all, thank you. Thank you for sharing it with me. I That was a gift you just gave me. I had to find my own way with Clara's grief. I was surrounded by so much pressure to bypass the experience, to move on quickly, to give God all the glory, um, basically consign her to the past and not speak of her again. Don't make people uncomfortable. They don't like it when you talk about your dead baby. She was supposed to, a miracle would have meant that she lived. I didn't believe that. Um,
Mm,
I believed her life was a miracle, and what she
mm,
did to me and how she changed the world in such a short period of time was a miracle. But everyone loses. Grief is part of the human experience, and there's no way to escape that. And a story like that really highlights that we've all experienced it, and we all will. And um, real love is being there with someone and bearing witness and standing in solidarity with them. And
mm.
if I'd had that available to me at the time, it would have made such a difference. So I just receive it, and I'm so grateful that these kinds of things exist now, because there are still mothers losing their babies. There are still
Oh,
children dying. There are still people experiencing grief. Like, that's an enduring story like that holds on. It's the benefit of a plural religious experience and a
mm,
broad worldview, because one is too limited, one is too narrow, and God is not as small as one way. Like, God, if God, because God's mystery, if God, then it's bigger than any. It's omnipresent,
mm.
omnipowerful, and we can't solve it in one denomination or one answer or one narrow way. So yeah, I mean, you got me emotional, but that's because it's just such a
Sorry.
gift. It's such a gift. And Clara, I mean, this is how she shows up for me. This is how she comes into conversation. This is how um, she makes my heart bigger. 20,
Well,
I don't know, 26 years later.
think about
Yeah,
like the amount of people Clara is helping through your book. This was you might not
right.
have written you wouldn't have written the book like you have
No,
if
it
it
was my
wasn't.
promise to her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. It's so powerful. Um, Going back to that moment, and I guess we'll kind of start to wrap up the interview, but um,
Mm.
what advice would you give yourself in that moment around when after the kind of smoke had settled with Clara and her passing?
With Clara, um, I would have just given younger me a hug. She didn't have, um, Tia at that time didn't have anyone honest with her. She was completely cut off from anybody who just knew how to be human, that wasn't
Mm,
so interested in serving an ideology over humanity. And it's where I formed my idea of fundamentalism, that fundamentalism always puts ideas over people, and that when we want to be human and really show up for somebody, we value their humanity first. The
mm,
system can really just go fuck itself. The purpose is the human being that we're supposed to show up for and love and make sure that human being survives. And if anybody had seen my humanity and held me through that time, it would have been a difference maker. Um, and I would have loved to be that for myself. I would have loved to have been a young woman with that kind of strength. But I was 24 years old, and I just had 3 kids under 3. And, I'd just been through a lot. If my story just went from my marriage to Clara, and at one iteration, it did just have that little narrow window, it would have been still a very big story. So
mm,
yeah, just hugs, just love.
mm. And I mean, there are probably people watching this now who are in a kind of who may be stuck in a fundamentalist worldview, or they're
Mm,
scared to come out to their parents, or maybe they're even in a patriarchal relationship that they don't want to be in anymore, or maybe
mm,
it's a person who realize they are being patriarchal, or maybe or like a man who's kind of
mm.
pursuing a relationship on unequal terms.
Yeah.
What's your advice as a broad sense, to people who may get something from your story?
I always tell people, if you're wondering those things, you are. um, trust it. That's your intuition, and that then, and believing yourself, believing those niggling little doubts and questions that you have. That's your first step that you make towards taking yourself seriously and stepping into your own autonomy. It's really important that you acknowledge those thoughts and feelings, and to know that it's okay. If you've got a faith component where you're afraid to ask questions because of what will happen to you, you need to know that God's big enough to hold your questions and your doubts. um, it is okay. And then if it's not okay, then that's not a God worth having. If God's going to break because you ask a question, then that's not God. So, um,
Whoa,
yeah, I
whoa, whoa,
just,
whoa, whoa! Say that again. That was incredible. That was
if
incredible.
God,
Say that again.
if God's going to break because you asked a question, then that's not God.
Oh, that is profound.
It sets you
I love
free.
that. I'm going to take that.
Yeah.
You can take the grab him by the pussy comment,
Take
and I
it.
can
Take it.
take.
Trade. It's a fair
fair
trade.
trade, fair trade. Um,
Yeah.
wow. Um, lastly,
Hmm.
uh, the two last questions. I might even throw in that last question, but what is the best piece of advice someone has ever given you?
Hmm. Coming in cold. Let me think. Best piece of advice. I mean, really, it's BT. Um,
Hmm.
there were people throughout my life who said, "Just be yourself," and I just thought that that was trite, and I didn't need to take it seriously. And I met with so much rejection anytime I was myself, so I was constantly conforming myself to whatever they wanted me to be. But in recovery, every single time I just show up as myself, I'm met with more success, opportunity, acceptance, ministry. I touch somebody's heart. Like there's
Yeah.
always good comes from just being Tia. And if also clarity. Sometimes people can't handle me. That's information too. If I'm too much for you, then you're probably not my people. That's okay. Which is better if we know that, we'll both be happier.
Mm.
So I think it's just be yourself.
That's great. That's great.
Everyone else
Uh,
is already taken.
what are you most thankful for?
My family. My family. I
Yeah,
have my beautiful children. They're all adults now. None of them are fundamentalists. They're happy and healthy. They're giving me grandchildren who are the joy of my heart. Um, and yeah, I'm most grateful for the reclamation that allows you to keep. I did the work. I did the work to save us, and it paid off in dividends because we have each other today.
that's great. So this is a total left field, totally, absolutely left field question, but I haven't asked it for a long time. I used to ask it all the time, and I think it might be just interesting to ask you, because
Mhm.
you don't have a fundamentalist perspective of religion. But let's say you did. Okay, let's say you're
Mm,
like, okay, let's
right.
say there's a magic genie, and this genie came out and said, there is one true religion, and it's one of the world's major religions. And make sure choose wisely. So the question is, what is the most plausibly true religion that you don't believe in?
The most plausibly true religion that I don't believe in.
Yeah. So you can't just like choose like what you believe now. You have to go, okay, a different worldview.
I think Hinduism. The
That's
idea, like, really, so in Hinduism, they really emphasize that you come back and you come back and you come back, and literally everything in nature composts. And I think about that when I think about fractals in nature and the reflective nature of the way, like, a snowflake looks like something else, and our lungs look like a tree, look like river tributaries.
yeah,
Um, I feel like the Hindus were probably onto something, that we come back, that we need to show reverence to everything around us. I don't believe in the Hindu faith. I don't know that much about it, but the idea that grandma could come back as a cow makes more sense to me the older I get. And But I think our souls have energy, and that energy must go somewhere. And so I'm very fascinated right now with astrophysics and um, dark matter. It's very exciting. Yeah, I
That
there's so much
I
to
don't
learn.
know. I don't know if we've ever had Hinduism, but I would say that I'm kind of on the same. I've
Yeah.
kind of lean more towards the Eastern if it's a religion I don't believe in. But
Hmm.
yeah, because you could go. I've heard people say Judaism because like you go like, well,
Mm-hmm.
if Christianity is true, like just take a step. Like the Mormonism and then Christianity and then Judaism is like remove as many assumptions as
Yeah.
possible. But I don't know. I
I'm
think
so tired of religious wars, and so that's what does that. I'm fighting over religion, using religion to mask what you're really fighting about. I'm over that. I don't
yeah.
think that's how humanity advances.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you so much, Tia, for coming on Deep Drinks podcast. Everyone go check out the book. Audible link down
Yeah.
below. It's also in the Deep Drinks reading recommended reading. You can get the hardcover hard copy as well on links in the description. Check them out.
Mhm.
And yeah, and make sure you go follow Tia on Instagram or Twitter. Do you have Twitter?
I don't have Twitter, but I have
Okay.
Threads. I also
Threads.
have
Awesome.
Substack, TiaLevings at substack.com.
Well, all your links will
Yeah.
be in the description, so go check them
Oh,
out
good.
and say hello
Yeah.
and say that you've come from Deep Drinks. And thank you so much for
Yeah.
coming on Deep Drinks, Tia.
Thank you so much. You were such a good interviewer, and this was a great hour and a half. Appreciate it.
Thank you to everyone who financially supports this channel, and a special thank you to the Archbishops of Deep Drinks, Jason Rollins, Matthew Monga, Digital Hammurabi, and Eric from Skeptics and Scoundrels. If you'd like to support this channel and see a cartoon avatar of yourself, check out patreon.com/deepdrinks.